What's up guys, I'm Phoenix Master 1 and welcome back for some more Fire Emblem Heroes, and this is gonna be my comprehensive analysis and review of the Chooser Legends 3 weapon refines for Brave Alm, Camilla, Micaiah, and Eliwood. I'll be going over my thoughts on these weapon refines, and I'll also go over many of the build options for various game modes like Aether raids, arena, and PvE. So if you do end up enjoying these kinds of in-depth reviews, I would really appreciate if you could crush the like and subscribe button just like Alm crushes his enemies. And with that said, let us begin. So speaking of crushing enemies, Alm can definitely do that with his new weapon refine. This is an extremely good weapon refine that makes him into a viable player phase threat, and Brave Alm has been waiting for so many years for this day. So let's go over the breakdown of Dracofalchion and its refine. So it of course has the effective damage against dragon units, and it also gives him +3 attack. And now with this weapon refine, Brave Alm essentially has permanent Tempest, which means that he can have 3 movement like a Cavalier without actually having any Cavalier disadvantages, like he can cross trenches for his tiles unlike cavalry units, and he also is not weak to any cavalry effective weapons. Not only that, because he's a sword infantry unit, he has got access to stuff like Time Pulse, which cavalry units cannot have access to. So that makes him an honorary cavalry unit. He can get +10 to all of his stats during the combat with easy conditions from his weapon refine. The primary condition can give him +5 to all of his stats, always in the player phase, but in the enemy phase he just needs to be not adjacent to an ally and he can get those stats. The weapon refinery actually works on an HP threshold, so he needs to be above 25% HP and then he'll get more stats. So this is really good because it makes him really bulky and it also makes him pretty fast. +10 speed is no joke, and also +10 attack is no joke when he already hits so hard. And then we move on to the final part of the weapon, which is giving him Windsweep and partial null follow-up against physical melee foes if Alm has got more speed during the combat against them. This makes Brave Alm into a very scary unit to face for many of these slow tanks like Fallen Edelgard, Brave Hector, and many of the other slow tanks, which are always gonna get windswept by Brave Alm, and there's nothing they can do. They have to eat up all of the damage that he does. And keep in mind that he does have his exclusive slotted skill, which gives him 25% true damage based on his attack stat. So it doesn't really matter if it's a unit like Brave Hector or any kind of blue tank, Alm is still gonna be just absolutely shredding them. And it's gonna be really hard for many of the physical slow tanks to just take hits from Alm, because his partial null follow-up means that their follow-up negation is not gonna be working, and Windsweep means that there's nothing they can do to kill him. And if he's gonna be facing dragons where Windsweep is not gonna be active, he can just one-shot them because of his insanely high damage output. So Brave Alm becomes a unit who's really hard to enemy phase because of his high damage throughput, the partial null follow-up, and also the Windsweep. So having Windsweep in this weapon opens up his slot B, and we'll see more of that in the build section. So overall, Brave Alm becomes a very meta relevant threat, which I think we're gonna be seeing a lot in different game modes because he's just extremely strong, and he's gonna make any kind of tank, no matter their color, cry for help because of how hard he can hit. So let's move over to his builds. If you want to run him with a budget build and you don't really want to spend any kind of premium fodder, then you can essentially go with hit and run as a budget skill. And this makes him a pretty nice arena assault unit because of his true damage and his dragon effectiveness. But if you want to invest even a bit seriously into Brave Alm, then in my opinion, Lot Speed Defense is by far his best slot B skill, and Time Pulse is by far his best slot C skill. So with that, he can have the second build with Flashing Blade as the Sacred Seal and Gale Force. So Brave Alm hits so hard that he doesn't exactly need any kind of specials, and he can basically function with Gale Force and get extra actions, and that makes him a really strong player phase threat. So this is pretty much his best build for most game modes in my opinion, because Time Pulse makes Gale Force a 4-turn special, which he can still trigger with his Windsweep if he's not one-shotting the enemy units, and Lot Speed Defense just adds to his flexibility and his potential because he can just get extra speed to trigger his Windsweep and do even more damage. Scenscale does do 7 HP recall damage to Alm after every combat, and that can be annoying for some people, especially with the HP threshold of his weapon refine. But in my opinion, Scenscale is by far his best slot A skill. There's no other slot A skill that can give him the damage output that Scenscale does, and it's just absolutely amazing and makes him unique. But still, I guess if you really dislike Scenscale and his chip damage, then Attack Speed Ideal is one of the better slot A options after Scenscale in my opinion. because it has really good synergy with the Windsweep that he has got in his weapon, as it can help him be at full HP and trigger the full condition of the ideal skill, get more offenses, and just get more speed. So you could run that if you don't want to run Scenscale, but still, I would recommend running Scenscale because the true damage is just absolutely ridiculous. It's pretty much similar to Brave Dimitri's Atrocity, but here, Alm has to pay price with the recall damage. I personally would never replace Scenscale myself, but still, this build is an option, I guess. And you can also use him in Aether Raid's offense. He's going to be an extremely powerful unit who can also function as a Gale Force unit with his ideal build using lull speed defense and time pulse. So you want to use him with Ardent Sacrifice and ideally with Winterburn Vendetta. Because she's going to be doing the 1 chip damage at start of your turn, you can instantly use your Ardent Sacrifice and pretty much set up the Wings of Mercy with your dancers and the other allies. So the plan with this build is that Ardent Sacrifice opens up the option of using it twice or thrice so that you can fall into the Wings of Mercy range. Keep in mind that Scenscale is going to be doing the 7 chip damage to you, which is going to be making it easier for you to fall into the Wings of Mercy range. So it really depends on what kind of team you're facing. In general, Gale Force strategies do take quite a bit of planning and execution. So you have to decide first how many Ardent Sacrifices you want to execute so that you can fall into the Wings of Mercy range at the right moment. You can also use him as a Gale Force Initiator if you don't want to use him with Ardent Sacrifice or Winterburn Vendetta. And because of his 3 movement, it is going to be really good for hit and run and just initiating Gale Force against the opponent's team. And Light Season is really amazing for Brave Alm in my opinion because it allows you to speed stack with Peony and Uller if you're going to be running both of them. And if you're going to be running Dagger, then the Pathfinder is really good with this 3 movement. You also have the option of Temari debuff on the opponent, so that can essentially give him more speed in a sense, and it can also help him trigger Flashing Blade. Peony makes it pretty easy to speed stack in general, and in my opinion you should definitely try to use Flashing Blade over Heavy Blade because I have been using Gale Force strategy a lot for many months, and Heavy Blade is such a hard skill to trigger against many of the high attack units, especially against the teams which use Duo Peony, Joint Drive Attack, and stuff like that. So Heavy Blade can be really unreliable, and Flashing Blade is going to be a bit better in my opinion, so you can run that. Even though Alm can reach really high amounts of attack, Flashing Blade ultimately is going to be a bit easier to trigger, and I'm speaking it from experience. You can just look at my Aether Raids videos and see how many times I have to play around the fact that I cannot trigger my Heavy Blade. You can also use him as a Gale Force unit with Wings of Mercy. So the reason behind this build is that many times when you're using Gale Force teams, if the opponent has a bulky unit like Brave Hector or Fallen Edelgard, usually you will not be able to deal with them with someone like Dagger or your general Gale Force units because they usually do not have enough damage output to just break through them. But Brave Alm has enough power even with a Gale Force build to crush them, and I'm talking about Brave Hectors and Fallen Edelgards, which are honestly really annoying for Gale Force teams. So Brave Alm can function there as a Gale Force unit and also a tank buster at the same time. So Wings of Mercy is really good if you're going to be using Air Force strategy or Ninja Lin, who can fall into the Wings of Mercy range. So that is ultimately the plan. There's always the threat of Brave Alm one-shotting opponent's units, so you could support him with Veluria or even Raphael to just bring down his special cooldown. You can also use him in Aether Raid's defense, and he's an absolute monster there because of his tank busting capabilities. Many people do like to use the save balls with near save and far save armor units, and Brave Alm just crushes those near save armor units. It doesn't matter if it's Brave Hector or whatever kind of unit like Arden or anything like that, he's still going to be doing true damage to them, and that is really good because he's going to be able to double them, and at the very least he's doing like 20 true damage. So that is really good, and that can weaken them. And if you can charge up Moonbow as a pre-charge special with maybe Infantry Pulse, that can make him hit really hard. So something like this even on low merges can work out really well, and I'm actually trying this build out on my own Aether Raids defense team, so maybe you'll see how it does in action in a couple of days. You can also, at max investment, just use Quick and Pulse and Time Pulse, and he doesn't really need any kind of Secret Seal at this kind of investment because he's going to be hitting so hard with the pre-charge Moonbow. It doesn't really matter if the Brave Hector has got Special Fighter or any near save armor units has any kind of guard effect. Still going to be doing so much damage with Moonbow, and then he's going to be doubling them with his partial null follow-up, and they can do nothing because he has got Windsweep in his weapon. So extremely nightmarish unit for many of the near save units. So this is definitely a really good option. And finally, you can also use him in arena. Unfortunately, we'll have to get rid of Scenscale here for our Duel Infantry for getting that scoring. So you can run our Duel Infantry with the usual build and run Gale Force. 3 movement infantry unit is really good, especially when he's not going to be getting stopped by the trenches, which are present on many of the arena maps. You can also run Ruptured Sky with Time Pulse to make it a 1-turn special, so you can retaliate back with that in the enemy phase, and in the player phase you can just trigger that on his second Windsweep hit. So that can be really good for getting more damage output. As for Brave Alm's IVs, I really prefer the plus attack IV even though Windsweep needs that speed check, but honestly against the bulky units which are going to be living his first hit, he's already going to be faster than them, so he doesn't really need to stack up more speed. And we're talking about slow tanks like Brave Hector, Fallen Edelgard and stuff like that. He's already outspeeding them, and most of the other units who are really fast, they're probably not going to be bulky enough to even survive one hit from Brave Alm. There are of course going to be some of the units which are going to be having the speed stat and the bulk to prevent his double and also live his first hit. So those can be annoying, but generally speaking, you can stack enough speed with Dracofalchion giving him plus 10 speed, lot speed defense, and then you can also get some team support with speed debuffs on the opponent, speed buffs on Alm himself, and then he reaches a really respectable amount of speed where he can easily trigger his Windsweep. So I personally prefer plus attack IV, but at lower investments you can definitely invest with plus speed IV if you have that, and that can help you with Windsweep against many of the threats. But at max investment, at higher investments, just go with plus attack IV because that's a super boon, and that scales up really well with Scenscale, of course, giving him that true damage. So plus attack is always good with a skill like that, which makes him into a tank buster. Brave Eliwood, despite being in a saturated class type of Lance Cavalier, ends up becoming a really unique Lance Cavalier in the player phase and also a meta relevant unit. He always had the potential because of this weapon giving him the Dragon effectiveness and Beast effectiveness. Beast effective weapons are not really that common, but they are really relevant because the best beast unit in the game, Fallen Edelgard, is quite common as a unit, and Brave Eliwood is a fantastic counter to her with this weapon. So this weapon's effects are always going to be active in the player phase, and if you want to get these effects in the enemy phase, then he needs to be within 2 spaces of an ally. So Brave Eliwood can actually function in both phases if you just keep that condition in mind. In player phase, he's of course going to be having all of these all the time. Eliwood gets plus 10 to all of his stats during the combat, and this is huge for a unit like him who can hit harder now. He can also be a lot faster, and he's also pretty bulky on the physical side especially. He also gets the partial null follow-up, which means that he can bypass the follow-up negation skills of Fallen Edelgard, Brave Hector, and units like those. And at last, he also gets the speed-based damage reduction, similar to how you see that in Close Call, Spurn, and skills like those. But the thing is that those skills are not available to cavalry units, and Brave Eliwood just has this built into his weapon. So that is amazing, and he doesn't really have to run something like Flow Refresh because he already gets the partial null follow-up in his weapon. And that allows him to run Windsweep or a Trace skill in his slot B, and even if he's not running Windsweep, he does have that damage reduction, and with that he can often survive even bonfires from Fallen Edelgard because his physical bulk is not that bad after getting plus 10 defense with his weapon. Brave Eliwood becomes a really formidable player phase Cavalier, and despite the fact that we just got Brave Erica, who I think is definitely a better Lance Cavalier than Eliwood, Eliwood can still stand out and stand his own ground against Brave Erica and Legendary Ephraim. I'm going to be talking about Legendary Ephraim in a different video, but for now let's focus on Brave Eliwood and the builds that he can run. So for his slot B, Windsweep is going to be the ideal skill. We have seen this combo again and again with partial null follow-up and null follow-up, so by now it shouldn't really be a surprise. So this allows him to safely initiate against many of the physical threats and just poke them with some really nice damage output. And he can also run attack speed solo as a Sacred Seal to just boost his offenses, and he can of course take some of the hits in the enemy phase as well with his weapon Refine. He can also go with Surge Sparrow and attack speed menace if you are going to be sacrificing a Brave Erica to him, and that is not really needed on him in my opinion. Windsweep build just works out fine, but if you want to have a build that can have the self-sustain, and if you want to use this kind of build in something like PvE, then Surge Sparrow gives you that healing with Moonbow, and it of course has the extra offenses. Attack speed menace is going to be pretty fantastic as well, and low attack speed makes him a lot bulkier and a lot faster, which can help him with the damage reduction built into his weapon. You also have the option of running a Trace skill in slot B, and you can also run Cat skill with a Smoke or a Menace skill in slot C. So that can give him extra offenses, and the Canto from near Trace skill is really amazing for the mobility shenanigans. So these are some of the options that you can run on slot B along with the offensive slot A options. Of course, Windsweep is going to be the most ideal one, but you can still explore some other options like the Trace skill or even the Lull skill. Brave Eliwood is really potent in the Astra season in Aether 8's offense because of his ability to deal with Seros, Duma, and Fallen Edelgards. So he does have the effective damage against those units, and he really should not be having any kind of trouble disposing them off. And with the Windsweep, he can also initiate against many of the bulky opponents, and that makes him a really fantastic cleanup unit, and also helps you with the pot collection, and goes really well with the Canto of Regin. So you can definitely have some nice cavalry combo going on, where Regin can just hit and run, and Eliwood can just, clean up. You can also use him as a Gale Force unit, though I wouldn't really recommend that, because he's not the best at it, because he doesn't have the -1 special cooldown, and he doesn't get any kind of special charges in his weapon. So he's forced to run Heavy Blade, and because of that, he has to commit to plus attack IV. And more often than not, the damage reduction and the extra defense that he gets from his weapon is actually a hindrance because he can fall into the Wings of Mercy range much later on because of his bulk. So you pretty much have to run Fury to make sure that he can take the chip damage and eventually fall into the Wings of Mercy range. And attack defense near Trace is going to be the option here so that he can trigger your Heavy Blade a bit easily. I personally wouldn't really use this kind of Gale Force Eliwood myself because of the issues that I stated. There are better Lance Cavaliers for this kind of role who have -1 special cooldown on their weapon, or they've got anti-guard or some kind of special acceleration in their weapon itself. So Brave Eliwood doesn't really excel in this kind of Gale Force role, but if you really want to use him with Gale Force, then this is an option, and you'll have to depend on Heavy Blade to get your special acceleration, and that's not the hardest thing with him because he does get plus an attack from his weapon, so he ends up at a pretty respectable attack stat. But again, like I said in the Brave Alm section, triggering Heavy Blade in the modern times of AR is not easy, especially with dual peonies and joint drive attack being a thing. Brave Eliwood is a meta threat in Aether 8's defense because of his Windsweep, partial null follow-up, and the extra stats that he gets. So Windsweep is going to be the best slot B option because keep in mind this is partial null follow-up. You only deny follow-up negation skills of the opponents. You can still get hit by their auto follow-ups from Quick Riposte or Malted Weapon or in general, Vengeful Fighter, Crafty Fighter, stuff like that. And even when he's not attacking the opponent and when he's just near his allies in the enemy phase, he can be a hard unit to snipe because of the extra speed that he gets and also the fact that he's actually pretty bulky on the physical side because of the +10 defense, so that is pretty good. If you want to invest heavily into him, then you can of course consider giving him ARD attack speed and also Fatal Smoke. Fatal Smoke just disables the Mystic boost and the healing of Brave Hector, Fallen Edelgard, and all of those self-sufficient tanks, and that is just really fantastic when you can safely apply that with the Windsweep build while also boosting his offenses to sky high with ARD skill and Blade Session. You can also use him in Arena, and he's going to be an extremely useful unit for dealing with Fallen Edelgards, many of the dragons, and many of the bulky units in general. You can run him with the Trace skill because that gives you really nice movement utility, and that is going to be a bit better than Windsweep in my opinion because the Canto skill can be such an invaluable asset in Arena. So you can run that with Ruptured Sky and attack speed solo. Panic Smoke can help him because so many people run visible buffs in Arena, so you can go in, attack someone, get the Panic Smoke off on their team, and then just retreat a bit and be near your allies and then just enemy phase the other units who are panicked. So that can be an option with B-Dual Cavalry 4. And finally, if you're investing into him to the max potential, then he can function as a mixed phase Cavalier. And he can also function with Distant Counter even though it might not look like it. So because of the +10 stats that he gets from his weapon, he can end up being pretty bulky actually at max investment with effectively having 54 defense and 40 resistance with this kind of build. So not a bad option if you're a really big Eliwood fan and if you want to run something out of the box. For Brave Eliwood's IVs, you mostly want to go with plus speed IVs so that he can trigger his Windsweep against majority of the units, and plus speed IV also helps him with the damage reduction in his weapon. Plus attack is mostly going to be needed when he's going to be running Heavy Blade and some kind of Gale Force build, but for the most part, he likes to have plus speed IV. Brave Camilla with her Weapon Refine doubles down on her offenses, and she actually gets a nice supportive utility with her Weapon Refine. So she has got the following new effects. She of course has the Gravity effect and Dazzling Staff built into her weapon, but we have already seen that. So now she can essentially get +10 attack and speed during the combat in the player phase. And she also gets the huge range, -7 defense and resistance visible debuffs on the opponents. So this allows her to support herself and also support the allies, and this can go really well with many of the units who can use debuffs like Mail Morgan, Guntra, and stuff like that. So Camilla's debuffs have really good range, similar to Arvis and Sias's Weapon Refine, and they do not really require any kind of stat check, and they're always going to be triggering at the start of a turn. So in case you need to visualize the range of Camilla's debuffs, here we have it. So here, as you can see, she has got a huge range both horizontally and vertically, and that allows you to debuff many of the opponents at the same time, and that can also help her do a lot more damage, and if she's not attacking, then her allies can take benefit of that. Camilla is an excellent offensive healer who is very potent at hit and run strategies in Aether 8's offense with safety fence, and if you want to see how that strategy functions, then make sure to check out my Legendary Claude Aether 8's offense showcase. And Camilla can pretty much function similarly to Legendary Claude. Obviously she doesn't have that insane weapon with null follow-up or the Fallen Star, but still she can basically hit and run because of the gravity effect. Unfortunately, Mystic Boost Sacred Seal is very common on many of the threats and tanks, and that is really annoying for an offensive healer like her because it just disables her Wrathful Staff. So that cuts her damage output significantly, but at least she can debuff those kinds of opponents with her Weapon Refine. So overall, Brave Camilla's Weapon Refine does a really simple thing. It took what she did before and made it even better, which is being offensive, and it also gave her the utility with the debuffs to support her allies. For a budget build on Brave Camilla, you can just run Double Savage Blow, and you can also run Imbue or Miracle as your special. It doesn't really matter too much. Blade Session is an option for Sacred Seal, and it greatly gives you more offensive power, so that is really good for a powerhouse like her. And in my opinion, if you can invest a bit more into her, then Attack Speed Catch 4 is by far her best slotted skill, because it has really good synergy with the debuffs that she does from her weapon, and that weapon of hers easily activates the catch condition. So make sure to not run Savage Blow with the catch skill because you need the opponent to be at full HP and also be debuffed, and the debuff part is already covered by her weapon. You can also run Speed Resistance Rain to just further boost your offensive potential with the Slotsy skill as well, and run Blade Session. So you just want to stack up all the offenses you can on Brave Camilla, and then the cat skill can activate with the debuffs. As I mentioned before, Brave Camilla is a very potent hit and run unit in Aether 8's offense with safety fence, and I'm actually going to be using her myself with this kind of build. So she can be used in both seasons, Light or the Aster season. It really depends where you can pull this off easily. Most of the time, it's a bit easier to pull this off in the Aster season in my experience. So you can run the budget build with just Savage Blow and Blade Session and run Miracle. Unfortunately, you cannot really have the reposition here on a budget build like you could on a Legendary Claude. But if you want to invest a bit more into her, then definitely try to get Return Plus or Rescue Plus, because that gives you a retreat option after you can get danced by a dancer. And of course, the cat skill is going to be superior for the damage output, and it doesn't really give you the recall damage, and the rain skill is also just the cherry on top. So it really depends how much you want to invest into her. Hopefully I can showcase her in upcoming Aether 8's offense videos. Brave Camilla is a lot better at Aether 8's offense than she's at defense, because on Aether 8's defense you're going to be facing many of the safe tanks, and they will always run Mystic Boost most of the time, so that can be really annoying. But still, if you want to use her as a restore trap unit, you can do that and definitely catch your opponents off guard and maybe snipe their important mythic units, which can make them surrender. But if they have a Farsive unit, then of course you cannot really snipe any of their units if they're playing well. So that just makes her extremely offensive, and you can also get rid of the isolation, any kind of penalties with the odd recovery. Of course, the odd recovery skill is not as potent as it was before after the safety fence, but in the anima season you do have access to the catapult and Duma, which can destroy 2 lanes, so that can help you still trigger odd recovery and perhaps a dancer trap or things of that nature. Finally, if you're a big fan of Camilla, then you can heavily invest into her with the cat skill. Like I said, that is her best slotted skill in my opinion, and you can also go with attack speed menace. so she can already debuff the defense and resistance of the foe with her weapon. And by debuffing their attack and speed, she can just debuff them completely, and that is extremely strong if you run teammates like Mail Morgan or Gantra with her. They are going to be enjoying those debuffs a lot, and Camilla herself also enjoys that, and she can also buff herself up with the Menace skill. For Brave Camilla's IVs, you can go with the plus attack IV or the plus speed IV. It really depends on how much investment you've got on her. If you have merges on her and if you're stacking a lot of speed on her with the Cat skill, Rain skill, Blade Session, then oftentimes she's going to be really fast even with the plus attack IV. But at low investment, at budget investment, plus speed IV is going to be a bit better in my opinion. Both of these are still just good options. It really depends on your premium options and the fodder that is available to you. I've used Brave Micaiah the most out of the Chooser Legends 3 batch before their weapon refines. I've honestly used her for years, ever since she got launched, and she finally gets a weapon refine to her Light of Dawn. So Micaiah gets a nice boost in the form of extra stats, and she also gets the auto follow-up, which was much needed on Brave Micaiah. So with these new effects, she can essentially get plus 10 attack, plus 10 resistance, and plus 4 speed and defense during the combat. She also gets a dual phase auto follow-up, which is really nice as she can tank most of the time in the enemy phase, and you can initiate and just do the double attack. She of course has a weapon that requires penalties on the opponent so that she can get more stats during the combat, and this does have good synergy with Yune's Whispers, her exclusive slot B skill. And we also have many other options. We have Tethys, who can run Temari Dagger. We have Air, who can also run Temari Dagger. We also have option of Fortune Bow Plus. We have Vika as well, who can run those kinds of debuffing skills. In general, we have a lot of sabotage skills and debuffing skills that can be run with Brave Micaiah to just give her extra stats during the combat with those debuffs on the enemy. So Micaiah can function as a pretty nice nuke and a magic tank with this kind of weapon refine, and one of her biggest issue does get resolved by having that auto follow up, which was much needed. And of course you want to have the teammates who can debuff the opponent. Now with that said, she does face competition from her original self, original Micaiah, who has a similar weapon refine that gives her auto follow up, extra resistance, but she also gets the damage reduction and can run Null Counter Disrupt on her slot B, which Brave Micaiah of course cannot because she's a flying unit. And in my opinion, blue is arguably the better color for tanking because there are just so many red threats like Dual Lift, Legendary Lilina, and even Duo Sigurd can hit pretty hard if he's running Triangle Adept. So all of those red threats are going to be extremely annoying, and Brave Micaiah does not enjoy facing them. On the other hand, Blue Micaiah can easily deal with them because of the Weapons Triangle advantage, and she's got the neutral matchup against the blue units, and against the green threats, she's mostly going to be facing Wrath and Python. I kinda wish that she got something unique which flyers usually do not have access to, kinda what Brave Alm and Eliwood got. But basically her weapon refine also does the same thing as Brave Camilla, which is take the thing which she did before and make it much better, which in this case is nuking and being a magic tank, and it also gives her the auto follow up which she really needed. So Brave Micaiah can still be a pretty nice unit, but of course there are the other options of the other Micaiahs which you can of course use for different game content. So for her budget build, you can definitely go with Resistant Smoke as the slot C skill. She already gets the attack and speed debuff from her slot B skill, so that is pretty good. And Mystic Boost can give you the self-sufficiency. And you can also run Sturdy Impact on her because many times against many of the physical threats, especially distant counter armor units, she's going to be taking a lot of damage. So with the combination of Sturdy Impact, the +4 defense that she gets from her weapon, and attack res range, she can have a bit better defense stat to at least survive. And stopping foes' follow-up attacks is of course really good, and she can herself make the auto double. You can also go with attack res Unity, which is going to be better than attack res Bond because it has got a bit better range, and you do not need to be immediately adjacent to Micaiah, so that is a bit good for the flexibility. And attack res Rain is in general going to be a pretty nice skill that you can run on Brave Micaiah, which can help her with tanking and also with her damage output. Brave Micaiah in my opinion shines most in Arena because of Green Duel Flying 4. Like I mentioned in my Green Duel Flying 4 video, if you remember, she is pretty much one of the best, if not the best, premium candidates of this dual skill because she has got Yune's Whispers, which is a 300 SP slot B skill, and if you run the dual skill and a 300 SP slot C skill, she can essentially score as a 185 BST unit, and that is absolutely amazing with the fact that she's a flying unit and that is really amazing in Arena because most of the Arena maps are flying favored, and she can easily destroy many of the cavalry threats and the armor threats. And the auto follow-up now is really amazing with her weapon refine, and she also can just support your allies with Yune's Whispers and the debuffs. Attack Res Menace might seem a bit redundant with the attack debuff from her slot B skill, but Yune's Whispers is not going to be triggering many times when the opponents are not close to each other. So that's where Attack Res Menace can help you, and not to mention, Attack Res Menace can also buff up Micaiah herself, which is really great. For Aether Raid's offense, in my opinion, Blue Micaiah is going to be a lot better because of her ability to run Null Counter Disrupt, and because of the reasons which I mentioned before. But still, if you want to use Brave Micaiah, that's an option, and you mostly want to pair her up with a near save armor unit like Arden, Zelgius, Black Knight, or of course the King, Brave Hector. So that can allow you to just deal with many of the physical threats which Micaiah does not want to face, and she can just focus on tanking the mages and also the staff units. Attack Res Bonfor is quite risky to be used in Aether Raid's offense because it can just open up the unit who's going to be adjacent to her getting sniped. So that's why running Mirror Stance 3 from the Divine Code section is going to be a bit better, and it can help you against many of the matchups where the opponent is going to be running some kind of 2-turn special. So it can be really good, and Attack Res Drain is going to be really invaluable for the extra bulk and the attack power. If you want to invest heavily into Brave Micaiah for Aether Raids, then you can of course run AR Fortrays on her slot B, and you can just run any of the other allies who can support her by debuffing the opponents. There are a lot of them. In the light season, it is possible with Temari Air. There's also Milla with high resistance who can run Sabotage Resistance from Solon, and that can help you with the debuffs in general. So she can use her slot B with a Fortray skill, which means that she can just go in, snipe one of the cavalry threats, and then return back to the allies, and hopefully get supported by a near save unit so that she doesn't get murked by a Note or Legendary Seeker or something like that, and she can focus on dealing with the magical threats of course. At higher investments, Brave Micaiah is going to be so insanely bulky on the magical side that she doesn't really need any kind of mystic boost to have the self-sufficiency, and she can opt to run Iron Shield Sacred Seal so that she doesn't get sniped by an archer and take on the archers much better, because with the attack debuff of the Trace skill and attack res drain, she can actually have a respectable effective defense in the combat. For Micaiah's IVs, I mainly like plus attack IV on her. I used to prefer plus speed IV before she got this weapon refine, but even now, her speed is fine to the point where she can auto double many of the follow-up negation units, so there's really no need to invest into that, and she can already get pretty fast with Yune's Whispers and her weapon. So we can go with plus attack IV so that she can have a better one-shot potential against many of the bulky armor and cavalry units. Overall from this batch, I feel like Brave Alm and Brave Eliwood were the winners. They got a lot of unique things which their class type cannot have, and they essentially got things that sets them apart in their own class type. For Brave Micaiah and Brave Camilla, they essentially took what they had before and doubled down on that and became much better in their roles. So this time we didn't really have any kind of weapon refine of the same power level of malted weapon refine from last year, and I guess that's a good thing. We don't really need that kind of insanely meta influential weapon refine every time we get these. And even I guess of Brave Ike's power level at the time when he came out with his weapon refine, obviously now we have a lot of damage reduction units, but back then he was like really insane. And of course Brave Hector just changed the entire metagame, so I don't think any of these units are going to be meta influential to that level of Brave Hector, which again is fine. Not every unit needs to be that kind of monster. Brave Alm can definitely be pretty unique though, and I can see many people using him. So let me know in the comments what do you think about the weapon refines in the comment section down below. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, then make sure to leave a like and a comment, helps me tremendously. And if you really enjoyed it, then you can always support me directly by becoming a member of my channel or by using super thanks. I want to thank all of my YouTube members for their constant support, and if you want to see more reviews like these, then make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because YouTube sub boxes are about as functional as Brave Hector after he realized that a red unit like Brave Alm can actually kill him. So with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.
The people fresh from the north